He survived war zones, saving soldiers' lives, but he didn't survive a simple traffic stop at home. A racist cop's quick trigger ended the life of a Navy hero, sparking outrage from the military, prosecutors, and millions of Americans. When the case reached court, the outcome was unlike anything the country had seen before. You'll want to stay until the very end. Before we begin, get comfortable, take a breath, and hit like and subscribe so you never miss tomorrow's gripping story. The sharp crack of the gunshot sliced through the quiet autumn air of Lakeview Heights, a sound so jarring it seemed to freeze time itself. Dr. James Carter, a 55-year-old black man, stood motionless on the smooth pavement, his tall frame hunched as a searing pain erupted in his chest. His warm brown eyes, usually steady and kind, widened in shock and disbelief. He stumbled back, one hand clutching the wound where his crisp white shirt was now blooming with dark red blood. The pavement beneath him glistened as the stain spread. In his other hand, his smartphone slipped from his grip, clattering to the ground. His gaze locked onto Officer Michael Sullivan, the white policeman standing just 10 feet away, whose Glock 22 still pointed forward, a faint wisp of smoke curling from the barrel. Sullivan's face was a mix of rage and sudden panic, his jaw tight as he realized what he'd done. He'd shot a man he didn't know. The weight of that moment hung heavy, a spark that would soon ignite a firestorm he couldn't imagine. Just an hour before the tragedy, Dr. James Carter's sleek black BMW X5 cruised down I-77 toward Lakeview Heights, the late October sun casting a golden glow over North Carolina's rolling hills. At 55, James was a renowned heart surgeon from Atlanta, a former Navy doctor who'd served a decade saving lives in war zones. Now, after a grueling week at the hospital, he was just James, a son heading to see his widowed mother, Evelyn, in her elegant home in the upscale suburb. The cool 60-degree air hummed through the car's vents, mingling with the soft jazz from his favorite Miles Davis CD. He smiled, thinking of the pecan pie tucked in the passenger seat, Evelyn's favorite from a Charlotte bakery. After a long flight from Atlanta, this weekend was his chance to unwind, to sit with his mom and hear her stories again. James had always been her pride, a man of quiet strength and deep faith, respected by colleagues for his skill and compassion. As the BMW turned into Lakeview Heights, its manicured lawns and million-dollar homes gleamed under the fading light. James eased off the gas, keeping his speed under the 25 miles per hour limit, unaware that his presence in this wealthy, mostly white neighborhood had already caught the wrong kind of attention. Unbeknownst to James Carter, his sleek BMW rolling through Lakeview Heights had caught the eye of Officer Michael Sullivan, a 42-year-old cop patrolling the quiet streets. Sullivan, a white man with 15 years on the Charlotte area force, carried a deep bias he rarely voiced aloud. To him, a black man driving a luxury car in this affluent, mostly white neighborhood didn't add up. It didn't matter that James was a respected surgeon or a former Navy officer. Sullivan's gut told him something was off. Maybe drugs, maybe trouble. "There he goes," he muttered in his patrol car, watching the BMW glide by. Without a traffic violation or any real cause, he swung his Ford Explorer around, flipped on the red and blue lights, and tailed James. The flashing lights filled James's rearview mirror as he glanced back, a slight frown crossing his face. He hadn't been speeding, hadn't done anything wrong. Maybe it was his Georgia plates, he thought. With the calm of a man who'd faced high-stakes situations before, James signaled right, slowed down, and pulled over neatly under a towering oak tree. He shut off the engine, lowered his window halfway, and placed his hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, ready to cooperate. Officer Michael Sullivan parked his patrol car a few yards behind James Carter's BMW, stepping out with a swagger that hinted at arrogance. His hand rested on the holster of his Glock 22 as he approached, his eyes narrowing at the polished car. Without a greeting, he barked, "License and registration, now!" His tone was sharp, skipping the basic courtesy every cop is trained to show. James, still calm despite the rudeness, looked up from the driver's seat. "Good afternoon, officer. Is something wrong? Was I speeding?" he asked, his voice steady and polite, shaped by years of discipline in the Navy and operating rooms. Sullivan ignored the question, leaning closer to the window, his gaze sweeping over James's pressed slacks and collared shirt. "What are you doing in Lakeview Heights?" he snapped. "This isn't your neighborhood. Hand over the papers." The words carried a sting, laced with suspicion that felt personal. James took a slow breath, sensing the officer's bias but refusing to let it rattle him. "I'm visiting my mother, officer. She lives on Magnolia Drive, just a few blocks away," he said evenly. He reached carefully into the glove box, pulling out a slim leather folder with his license, registration, and insurance. "Here you go," he said, passing them through the window. Sullivan snatched the documents, flipping through them with a sneer. "Atlanta, huh?" he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Long way to come. Visiting Mom? Sounds convenient. What's the real reason you're here?" The accusation hit James hard, but his training kicked in. He straightened, his tone firm but controlled. "Officer, I've done nothing wrong. Your comments are out of line, and I'd like to know why you stopped me. I'm happy to cooperate, but this needs to stay professional." Sullivan's face reddened, his pride stung by the calm authority in James's voice. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not here. Not like this. Sullivan's harsh words lit a fire in James Carter, but years of discipline held his anger in check. He saw the officer's hand twitching near his holster, the flush of rage on his face. Staying in the car felt like a trap. Any wrong move could escalate things. James made a quick decision. Getting out might calm things down, show he wasn't a threat. "All right, officer," he said, his voice steady as he unbuckled his seatbelt. "I'll step out as you asked." He opened the door slowly, stepping onto the pavement beside his BMW, standing tall at 6 feet, his posture calm but dignified. Sullivan took a step closer, invading James's space, his voice low and venomous. "You don't belong here, you hear me? This is a nice neighborhood, not for people like you." The words cut deep, raw, and hateful, stripping away any pretense of professionalism. James's jaw tightened, but he met Sullivan's glare. "Officer, your behavior is wrong and illegal," he said, his tone cold and firm. "I won't stand for this. I'm going to record this and call my attorney." With a slow, deliberate motion, James reached into his jacket's inner pocket for his phone, his movements clear and non-threatening. But to Sullivan, clouded by bias and adrenaline, that motion was a spark to a powder keg. "What are you doing?" he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "Stop! Weapon!" Before James could react, before his hand even cleared the pocket, Sullivan yanked his Glock 22 from its holster, aimed, and fired. The 9mm bullet tore through James's chest with a sickening thud, the force slamming him back against the BMW's door. His eyes widened in shock, his breath catching as he clutched the wound, blood seeping through his fingers. "No," he gasped, staring at Sullivan, disbelief etched on his face. His legs buckled, and he slid to his knees, then collapsed onto the warm asphalt, the phone skittering across the ground. The world seemed to slow, the golden autumn light fading in his vision. Sullivan stood frozen, the gun still raised, his chest heaving. The smugness was gone, replaced by a dawning horror as he looked at the man bleeding out at his feet. Dr. James Carter, a heart surgeon who'd saved countless lives, a Navy veteran who'd served his country, lay dying on a quiet street in the nation he'd sworn to protect. His last thoughts were of his mother, waiting for him with a smile, and his wife, Grace, who'd never know why this happened. The phone, Its screen cracked, but still glowing, lay beside him, a silent witness to the injustice that had stolen his life in an instant. Sullivan's hands trembled, the weight of his actions crashing down, but it was too late to undo the tragedy he'd set in motion. The single gunshot echoed through Lakeview Heights, shattering the suburban calm and bouncing off the grand homes. Neighbors peeked through curtains, hearts racing at the sight of a man slumped beside a black BMW, a police cruiser parked nearby. Within minutes, 3 911 calls flooded the dispatch line, reporting a shooting and a body on the ground. Officer Michael Sullivan, still gripping his Glock, snapped out of his daze. Panic clawed at him as he fumbled for his radio, his voice shaky but forced into a professional tone. "Unit 214. Shots fired at Magnolia Drive and Lakeview Lane," he said, swallowing hard. "Suspect was hostile, reached for a weapon. I fired in self-defense. Need an ambulance and backup now." It was a lie, and deep down he knew it. He glanced at the phone by James Carter's body, its cracked screen glinting in the fading light. His stomach churned. Sirens wailed in the distance as 2 patrol cars and an ambulance screeched onto the scene, their red and blue lights painting the street. Sergeant Maria Torres, a tough 45-year-old former Marine, stepped out first, her eyes scanning the chaos. "Mike, what happened?" she demanded, her voice sharp. Sullivan stammered, repeating his story about a weapon, but his trembling hands betrayed him. Paramedics rushed to James, kneeling in the growing pool of blood. They checked his pulse, their faces grim. Too much blood, too little time. They started chest compressions, but hope was fading fast. Torres, taking charge, ordered the area taped off and signaled another officer to collect evidence. She spotted the phone and James's wallet lying open nearby. With gloved hands, she picked it up, her flashlight illuminating a Georgia driver's license. James Edward Carter, 55, Atlanta. Then her breath caught. A Navy ID card listing him as a commander, a doctor who'd served at the Naval Medical Center. Torres, a veteran herself, felt her blood run cold. This wasn't just a civilian. This was a decorated officer, a hero. She looked back at Sullivan, now leaning against his cruiser, pale and sweating. "Mike, you better be telling the truth," she muttered, but doubt gnawed at her. She stepped away, switching her radio to a secure channel. "Chief, this is Torres," she said, her voice low and urgent. "We've got a serious situation. The victim's a Navy commander, critical condition. We need you here, and we need internal affairs fast!" Sullivan overheard snippets, Navy commander, and his heart sank. Cold sweat soaked his shirt. He hadn't just shot a man. He'd killed someone whose death would shake far more than this quiet town. His career, his life, was unraveling, and the truth was closing in. The ambulance tore through Lakeview Heights, its siren piercing the dusk as paramedics fought to save Dr. James Carter. Inside, they pumped oxygen and pressed bandages to his chest, but the bullet had torn through vital organs, and blood loss was severe. At Charlotte Medical Center, a team of top surgeons waited, rushing James into the operating room. For 3 grueling hours, they battled to repair the damage, but at 8:42 p.m., James's heart stopped. The monitors flatlined, and the room fell silent. Dr. James Carter, a Navy veteran and life-saving surgeon, was gone, killed by a single senseless shot. Word of his death spread fast, reaching the Navy's top brass through urgent channels. In Norfolk, Virginia, Vice Admiral Thomas Reynolds, a 62-year-old commander who'd known James from his Navy days, took the call in his office. His weathered face hardened, his fist slamming the desk. "James Carter? Shot like that? In our own country?" he growled, his voice thick with anger. James had been one of his best, a doctor who'd saved sailors under fire, a man of honor. This wasn't just a tragedy, it was an outrage. Reynolds called an emergency meeting with senior officers, their shock turning to fury as details emerged. A baseless traffic stop, a cop's bias, a phone mistaken for a weapon. The Navy wouldn't stand for it. They couldn't storm the courts, but they could make sure justice wasn't swept under the rug. Reynolds picked up the phone, dialing North Carolina's governor. "This is Vice Admiral Reynolds," he said, his tone steel. "One of our own, a Navy commander, was gunned down in your state. We expect a full, transparent investigation. No excuses." Similar calls went to Charlotte's mayor and state senators, each carrying the Navy's weight. An official letter was sent to the Justice Department, urging a federal probe into possible civil rights violations. The message was clear. The Navy was watching, and they demanded accountability. Back in Charlotte, the hospital notified local authorities of James's identity, amplifying the stakes. Sergeant Maria Torres, still at the scene, felt the weight of those calls as her radio buzzed with orders from the chief. The small town of Lakeview Heights was now under a national spotlight, and Officer Michael Sullivan's lie was about to face a storm of scrutiny he couldn't outrun. James's death wasn't just a local tragedy, it was a wound to the Navy's pride, and they'd fight for him. The Navy's outrage sent shockwaves from Norfolk to Charlotte, piling pressure on Lakeview Heights Police Department. Chief Robert Langley, a seasoned leader, knew this wasn't a case he could soft-pedal. His phone rang non-stop. Calls from the governor's office, senators, even a direct line from Vice Admiral Reynolds himself. Langley ordered Internal Affairs to dig into Officer Michael Sullivan's actions with no stone unturned, demanding full transparency. He also allowed Navy investigators to observe the probe, a rare move that showed how serious this was. The investigation moved fast. Sullivan's story about James Carter pulling a weapon fell apart when officers found only a cracked smartphone at the scene. No gun, no threat. His body camera, conveniently turned off, raised red flags, and neighbors' statements confirmed they'd heard Sullivan yelling before the shot, with no sign of a struggle. District Attorney Benjamin Hayes, a sharp 50-year-old prosecutor, saw the case for what it was: a clear abuse of power driven by bias. With evidence mounting and the Navy breathing down his neck, Hayes made his move. At a packed press conference, TV cameras rolling, he stood tall, his voice steady. After reviewing the facts, "We're charging Officer Michael Sullivan with first-degree murder in the death of Dr. James Carter," he said. "This was a deliberate act, rooted in prejudice, and we're considering the death penalty." The crowd gasped. Charging a cop with murder, let alone seeking death row, was almost unheard of. Hayes knew the stakes. This case wasn't just about one man. It was about trust in the system. The Navy, the public, and James's family were watching. Back at the station, Sullivan, now suspended and isolated, felt the walls closing in. His lie had crumbled, and the weight of his actions, killing a Navy hero and celebrated doctor, was about to bury him. Justice was coming, and it wouldn't wait. As the legal storm grew, Grace Carter, James's 53-year-old widow, stepped into the spotlight with quiet strength. A literature professor from Atlanta, she flew to Charlotte with their 2 grown children to bury her husband and fight for justice. At a packed memorial service in a local church, attended by city leaders, Navy officers, and medical colleagues, Grace stood in a simple black dress, her voice steady but heavy with grief. "James was a healer, a father, a veteran who served this country," she said, her eyes fixed on the crowd. "He believed in fairness and kindness, but he was taken from us by hatred. We don't want revenge. We want justice, so no one else suffers like this." Her words, raw and heartfelt, spread across news outlets, striking a chord with millions. The medical community rallied, with doctors and nurses holding vigils outside Charlotte hospitals. Navy veterans and civil rights groups joined in, organizing marches and raising funds for the Carter family's legal battle. James's story became a rallying cry, a symbol of the fight against prejudice and abuse of power. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #JusticeForJames and op-eds praised Grace's dignity. The pressure wasn't just local. National veterans organizations sent letters to Congress demanding police reforms. In Charlotte, the community's response was overwhelming, with strangers leaving flowers at the spot where James fell. Grace's speech inspired hope, showing a family broken but unbroken, determined to honor James's legacy. For middle-aged and older Americans watching, her courage was a reminder of resilience and the power of standing up for what's right. The Navy, too, stood firm, ensuring James's death wouldn't be forgotten, pushing for a reckoning that would echo far beyond Lakeview Heights. 6 months later, Officer Michael Sullivan's first-degree murder trial began in Charlotte's Superior Court, drawing eyes from across the nation. The courthouse buzzed with reporters, activists, and Navy officers in crisp uniforms, including Vice Admiral Thomas Reynolds on key days. Their presence was a quiet but powerful reminder of James Carter's service. Grace Carter and her 2 children sat in the front row, their faces composed but heavy with loss. The courtroom, packed to the brim, felt electric with tension. District Attorney Benjamin Hayes led the prosecution, laying out a rock-solid case. He walked the jury through that fateful October day. Sullivan's baseless stop of James's BMW, his hateful words caught by a neighbor's Ring camera, and the fatal shot when James reached for his phone. Hayes held up the cracked smartphone, sealed in an evidence bag. "This was Dr. Carter's weapon," he said, his voice firm. A phone he wanted to use to record an officer's misconduct. For that, he was killed. Forensic experts testified that the bullet hit James's chest at close range, with no signs of a struggle. A police trainer explained how Sullivan broke every rule of force, his body cam suspiciously off. A neighbor, a retired teacher, recounted hearing Sullivan's angry shouts. Then a single shot. No chaos, no threat. Hayes even dug up Sullivan's past, showing a pattern of complaints about his aggressive, biased behavior. The defense, led by a seasoned attorney, fought hard but struggled. They painted Sullivan as a stressed cop who made a split-second mistake, believing James was reaching for a gun. They downplayed the racial slurs as heated words and called fellow officers to vouch for Sullivan's character. But the evidence was overwhelming, and the jury, 7 women, 5 men, a mix of races, listened closely, their faces hard to read. The trial's most gripping moment came when Grace Carter took the stand. In a soft but steady voice, she spoke of James, his late nights saving patients, his Navy service under fire, his love for their kids. She described the call that shattered her world, the pain of losing her partner of 30 years. "All he wanted was to visit his mom," she said, her eyes glistening. "Please give him the justice he deserves." The courtroom was silent, jurors wiping tears, even the judge visibly moved. For older Americans watching on TV, Grace's dignity was a beacon of strength, a reminder of family and fairness. After weeks of testimony, Hayes's closing argument was searing. "This wasn't a mistake," he told the jury. "This was murder, born of prejudice and power. Dr. Carter was a hero, and he deserved better." The defense's plea for leniency felt hollow against the Navy's presence and the public's outrage. The jury deliberated for 3 days, an eternity for Grace and her family. Finally, they returned. The foreman, a middle-aged nurse, stood. "On the charge of first-degree murder," she said, "we find the defendant, Michael Sullivan, guilty." A gasp rippled through the room. Sullivan slumped, his face ashen. Grace closed her eyes, clutching her children's hands, tears falling. The Navy officers nodded solemnly. For the nation watching, it was a moment of relief. Justice had been served for a man who'd given so much. The trial moved swiftly to sentencing, with Officer Michael Sullivan now facing life without parole or the death penalty for the first-degree murder of Dr. James Carter. District Attorney Benjamin Hayes stood before the judge, his voice steady and forceful, arguing for the maximum punishment. "This wasn't just a crime, it was a betrayal," he said. "Sullivan used his badge to act on hatred. gunning down a Navy hero, a doctor, a father, for no reason but the color of his skin. Dr. Carter's family, his community, and this nation deserve justice that matches this loss. He recounted the racial slurs, the deliberate shot, and the pain etched on Grace Carter's face, urging the judge to send a message that such acts won't be tolerated. The defense fought back, pleading for life in prison. Sullivan's lawyer spoke of his 2 young kids, his years of service, and a tough childhood that shaped his temper. "He made a terrible mistake," the lawyer said, "but he's not beyond redemption. Spare his life." Sullivan sat silently, head bowed, the weight of his guilt visible. The presiding judge, a stern 65-year-old known for fairness, listened carefully, reviewing the evidence and both sides' arguments. He called Sullivan to stand. The officer rose, legs shaky, his eyes avoiding the courtroom. "Your actions were cruel and unjust," the judge said, his voice echoing. "You took a life of immense value, a man who served his country and saved others because of blind prejudice. This demands the strongest response." He paused, then delivered his ruling. "By the authority of this state, I sentence you, Michael Sullivan, to death." The courtroom froze. A death sentence for a cop was rare, almost unthinkable, but it felt right to many there. Sullivan let out a choked sob, collapsing as bailiffs led him away. Grace Carter, holding her children, wept, not from anger, but from relief. The Navy officers in the gallery sat stone-faced, their presence a testament to James's legacy. For older Americans watching, the verdict was a bittersweet triumph. Justice for a good man, a signal that the system could work. But the scars remained, and the fight for fairness was far from over. The news of Michael Sullivan's death sentence flashed across screens, sparking cheers from those who saw justice for Dr. James Carter, and debate from others who questioned its severity. At a press conference, Vice Admiral Thomas Reynolds stood tall, his voice firm. "Today, justice honored a hero," he said. "Dr. Carter's loss cuts deep, but his legacy will inspire us to fight for equality and honor." Grace Carter, in a quiet statement, thanked the court and supporters. "No ruling can bring James back," she said, "but let his death be a call to change how we treat each other." The case rippled beyond Charlotte, prompting police training reforms and community dialogues on bias. For middle-aged and older Americans, James's story was a reminder. Prejudice can destroy, but courage and unity can heal. It taught that standing up, like Grace did, matters, and that systems, though flawed, can deliver justice when pushed. It urged everyone to check their own biases, to listen, and to act with fairness, whether in a neighborhood or a courtroom. Every choice counts, and one voice can spark change. Dr. Carter's life showed the power of service. His death showed the cost of hatred. Let's honor him by building a world where dignity prevails. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We share meaningful stories like James's to inspire and unite. Don't miss the next one. Together, we can keep these lessons alive.